All right. Hello and welcome back to the Island 54 development stream. I'm not sure what went wrong with starting that stream, but it looks like the scheduled stream didn't sync up properly with my broadcasting software. So hopefully everyone finds their way into this live stream. I'm just going to check the status of things. Just making sure that this is available. Yep, we appear to be listed as live now. Awesome. So yesterday I implemented the string pulling algorithm using I can't remember what it's called, the simple stupid funnel algorithm. Um, and that I almost finished that on stream. There were just a couple of little bits and pieces for me to finish off. So that is now implemented. Once a few more people get in, I might look at doing uh, doing a demo of it. But with that done, I kind of feel like the pathfinding is at a point where I can move on to some other things. So what I'm going to do today is work on getting the terrain scatter back into the game. Now, previously, what have we got here? I'll just pull up my Unity window if I can find a Unity window. This one will do. The trees and stones were being generated on the client, and I need to move that over to the server, obviously. And there are a couple of reasons for doing it like that. I don't want the clients to know the exact algorithm because I don't want them to know where the good resources are. And I can't make it too random because I need the every player to have a similar view. Now, additionally, when someone picks up a stone or a tree, well, not picks up a tree, but harvests a tree, I of course need that state to be shared among players as well. So I want the terrain scatter, that's the trees and the stones, to be generated on the server. Now let's see if I am able to take my existing terrain scatter system and just enable it. Now this hasn't actually been run in quite a while, so I'm not all that confident that this is going to work. I do apologize, I'm a little just distracted, just making sure that everything is indeed synced up, given that my scheduled stream didn't kick off as I expected. So I thought I'd do an early start to the stream today as well. I realize why I don't usually do the slightly earlier start. It was a bit of a rush to get things started, but hopefully this time is a bit better for people in Europe. I know there are a couple of people in Europe who like to watch, so hopefully they get the notification that this is live. Okay, so here is my regular world. I'll start my service so that the terrain can load. I'll restart it. I'm not sure what state that's in. I have turned on the scatter component in my client. A reminder that this is completely untested since I moved the terrain generation to the server, so this may not actually be a very good demonstration. Well, we've got trolls everywhere. Let's get rid of those trolls for starters. Delete. Try that again. I suspect this is not going to work based on the fact I didn't see any trees just then. No, no trees. And there's still lots of trolls. Why do we have lots of trolls? That's a lot of trolls. Ah, yes, I know why. I have changed my scatter system while recording one of my devlog episodes. I bet you I have inserted trolls as scatter. Yeah, here we go. So let's turn off those. We'll turn the stones on. We'll turn the trees on. We'll turn the shrubs on. And then I'll play it again. And we can see the stones. Not sure why the trees aren't coming in. But of course, if I were to pick up a stone like that, another client wouldn't be able to see that because these entities are all just completely client-side. The server's not aware of them. We have some shrubs. love to know where my trees are. They're probably configured to only kick in at a certain altitude, and this terrain just isn't generating high enough for that, is my guess. All right, so a little bit about how I'm planning to implement doing the scatter on the server. They obviously belong on the entity server, I think, because that's where items and mobs and things are intended to go. These are a little bit different though, because there's a whole lot of them, and they're not expected to update as often as a player, for example, or a mob. So players and mobs, we expect to update every tick because they're usually going to be doing something. But a shrub or a stone is just going to sit there until someone picks it up. Now, if we go and look at my sorry, if we go and look at my, I've even forgotten what I was about to show you. That's how distracted I am this morning. Yeah, if we go and look at my protocol, sorry, let's go and look at my protocol, i54.proto. You'll see that this is able to send from the server, it's able to send entity updates. And one of the things it's able to send is an update. It can either create entities, it can update entities, and I've added the ability for it to invalidate entities. So this is expected to be used when there are just too many updates going on around a player. So I don't want them to receive all of these updates over UDP. And so the intention here is that an individual entity could be updated by just having its ID sent through and the client being told, hey, whatever copy you have, you should go and fetch a new copy just over TCP in your own time and use that going forward. It is just a way of preventing every update from having to go over UDP. Now, I can potentially overload this mechanism to send through the updates for all these shrubs and things. As you go into as it loads a piece of terrain, it doesn't need to bring in these shrubs and things right away. It's worth noting that the terrain actually gets loaded one beyond what's visible to the player. So we've got tons of time before the player comes along here and that terrain gets displayed. That terrain was loaded ages ago. So it's not important that this information come in over UDP. So I'm going to change my protocol a little bit. And allow the server to actually just say, hey, you need to fetch an entire chunk worth of entities because I don't want to send through every entity just because the player's moving around. So here's a server. We can send through entity updates. So I'm going to send through a new kind of update called, let's call it a chunk update. This will allow the server to just say, hey, go off and just fetch a whole bunch of entities. Now, this will be useful also if you did have lots of players all sitting within one town or something. Then it could focus on just sending the updates for the players that are physically close to you, like in the game that are right near you, and defer the further away players so that the updates can be slowed down a little. It just means we're not trying to pack as much into UDP. One of the issues with UDP, while it's lightning fast, and it doesn't slow down when there's packet loss, it just drops the packets. It does have a problem that a lot of developers try to basically re-implement the reliability of TCP on top of UDP. Now, I'm trying to avoid that because otherwise you end up just literally ending up with TCP over UDP. And so I do want to be able to just fall back and say, no, I'm just not going to send updates through. Once we can't get enough data through, I'm just not going to send the updates through, and you can just fall back to a slower, more reliable mechanism at that point in time. All right, so we've already got this entity update type. I'm going to create a new chunk update. Now, chunks don't have IDs, they have coordinates. Now, where do I store? A chunk coordinate is stored as a UVW. So let's store that. because that really does identify the chunk. I'm going to send through an update type. It's really not likely, I can't imagine, to ever be create or update, but I will include it just for completeness. Update type is the update type. This will always be, in my mind, invalidate. So this will only ever be used for the server telling the clients to just go off and get a new copy of the chunk. Okay. Now I might want to put in here to do. Actually, I'm going to change my mind on that. I'm not going to call this a chunk update. I'm going to call it a chunk invalidation. And in here, I'm going to call this a chunk invalidation type. I'll explain why in a moment. And this is going to be, we can either tell it to do the entities, or we could tell it to do the terrain, for example. So now I can use this. What's wrong with that? What does an entity look, an enum look like? Give it a name equals. Oh, I must have to start at 0. It must be 0. Okay. I am going to put one actually called invalid in here. This is just something in the way that protobuf works. If someone chooses not to specify this, it will default to 0, and I want it to be explicit. I've called it required elsewhere. This, so having the first one as just an invalid value is just a way of detecting if someone chooses not to display that. Let's just do chunk invalidation type required. I'm a little annoyed that these aren't namespaced, but all right. So now, if we put a repeated on that, the server can send through a chunk coordinate through to the client and say that it needs to go and reload all the entities in that chunk. Or if somebody goes and I don't know, this isn't going to happen in the game, but if someone goes and sets off a massive explosion that completely terraforms a chunk all in one go, we don't want to send through all the updates for the terrain. Then it could just send it through a terrain invalidation, and that would tell the client you need to go off and refetch that piece of terrain now. Okay, so that gives me the ability to chunk invalidation. That allows the server to instruct the client to update its entities. So what other concerns do I have here? I'll bring up my Trello board because I've got a few notes in here. Yes, it's my first day. Thank you and welcome. Hopefully this earlier start, I'll be able to maintain a bit. It means that I'll be able to do slightly longer streams because I tend to have things on early afternoon Australian time. It means I'll get more done before I start getting hungry, in theory. And people in Europe will have better access as well, and America for that matter. I know that my timing with my streams has not been great lately. And yes, pathfinding is mostly done. So I might as well let's do a demo. Actually, we've got 6 people in at the moment across the channels. So let's just get a troll in the game. Of course, the troll is not going to pathfind around any scatter. I'm going to have to pull this player out because I don't know where origin is. Start a new player. And you can see that he comes at us. He doesn't clip through the terrain. Oh, there he goes. He's clipped through the terrain there. I did say that there's some weirdness. All right, that's a little weird. Not quite the demo I was after. I do know of a couple of bugs around the edges of chunks, and I know how to fix those. And so I decided to fix those once I've got the scatter in, because I've got to put in a bunch of code to get the troll to know that they can't walk through a tree, for example. So apologies for the failed demo there, but yeah, you can see that um, when it's not clipping through the terrain, it is behaving quite well. And this is actually just an offset issue. It's when he gets to the edges of the chunk, he suddenly wants to be over on the other side of the chunk. And so he's currently stuck on the boundary between two chunks there. He's just flipping between trying to be on the other side of the chunk and being back here. But yeah, so I do have some work to do there. I will take that troll back out of the game so he doesn't interfere with us as I move forward. All right, so back to scatter. Hey, he was meant to get taken out of the game. Why didn't that happen? Oh, I created a new troll. Let's delete all the trolls and play. Okay. So on the server, I need to get it to go and generate all of this scatter whenever it generates a chunk for the first time. So it needs to know whether or not it's created the scatter. Now, it's probably not enough to know whether or not the terrain has been generated, because you can imagine a world where the server goes off and generates some terrain. I come through in the back end and go and delete all the entities, and all of a sudden I will have deleted all the terrain scatter that it's already created and not know that it still needs to regenerate that terrain when chunks get loaded. And alternatively, I might have reason to delete cached terrain out of the back end, and I don't necessarily want it to remove the scatter. I guess in that case, I do want it to remove the scatter. So I do want it to know whether or not it's created scatter. I want it to be able to delete those entities, or I want to be able to delete all of the trolls and things from the game really easily. I want to be able to say, all right, within a certain area, just get rid of all of the mobs, but I don't want it to get rid of the things that were generated as part of scatter. So I thought what I might do is come up with this concept of static entities. Now, I know that Unity has this concept of static entities as well. And it's a similar concept, but I'll be using mine to mean I don't expect any properties of this to update regularly. So stones, trees, they could get picked up, they could get harvested. Buildings, they might be entities or they might be a different kind of thing. But again, they're relatively static. Once they've been constructed, they don't get updated very often. So I am going to put an extra property on my entities so that I can treat them differently. Now, I think my schema for my entities is in here. It is. Now, I could put this as a component, but it feels a bit too core. So this is something I want to be able to just index at the entity level and have it just know instantly whether or not something is static. So where is my actual entity schema? Let's actually add something in here and say is static, which is going to be a Mongoose schema types. I presume I've got a Boolean in here. Yes. So we can specify that as a Boolean. Now, in Mongoose, can I define a default value? Mongoose schema default value. I assume I can. Yeah, we can give it a type and we can give it a default. That's easy. So let's expand this one out to include a type as that. and a default of false. That way, if we don't specify it, things are not static by default. Okay. Next thing I need to think about is what are the when am I going to create the scatter? So I could create scatter whenever I render a chunk. The problem is I'm not caching the chunks currently. These are all just being generated by the server every time a client fetches them. So at the very least, I need if the terrain service is the one responsible for generating the scatter, then it needs to know whether or not it has generated scatter for a chunk before. So that is going to be my next step, I think. Well, static entities was easy. I haven't got any endpoints for it. I still need to do that. For example, I want my default delete endpoint to not hit up the static entities. So I'm going to leave that one unchecked. I've got chunk persistence down here. I don't need to persist the chunks, the terrain for the chunks, as long as I just persist the fact that I've generated scatter. Apologies for jumping all over the place here, but you are seeing how my mind works while developing new code here. A little bit disorganized. So in the terrain service, I guess it's the chunk controller where we get asked for where's the, it's not the mesh that I want. It's the chunk. Here we go, get chunk. That must get, yes, I'm going to just export that from here. That I was doing that, but that makes it not clear that it is being exported. So we've got this get chunk. When we generate the chunk, we need to also return chunk to do if terrain scatter has not previously been generated, then generate it and record that it's been generated. So we need a way of checking if scatter has been generated. Let's go and create a service for this. We'll call it scatter. And we'll create a file, scatter ts. So the first thing this needs is a function to ask whether or not a chunk has had its scatter generated. So public has generated scatter. This will take a chunk coordinate. And this will return a Boolean. Return false for now. Obviously, I will implement that in a moment. And we need a generate scatter function. Now, I mentioned in one of my previous streams, I'm not sure if it was my last one or the one before, that what I've not said in my devlog episodes, I don't think I've said it, is my current short to medium term goal, it's really my medium term goal, is to play test the game mechanic for resource harvesting in this game. I don't want it to just be a matter of, like in, Minecraft, you walk up to a tree, break the tree, and you get the resources from the tree. So it's I find that not to be an overly engaging experience. People go and build mines in Minecraft and they just dig down into the ground. And as long as you avoid caves, it's just a repetitive process. And I know that's what a lot of people want, and I understand the appeal of that. It can be a little meditative when you're doing something repetitive like that in a game. But I want something a little closer to anyone who's played 7 Days to Die. Uh, when you go to get wood or stone, you've got the constant fear of being detected by zombies who will come over, and so you need to be willing to defend yourself. Another game with a similar mechanic to that is Eve Online, and in Eve you get resources from asteroids, and usually, except at the very lowest levels in Eve, you go into an asteroid belt. The very first thing you have to do is clear out the enemies from there. So um, there are bandits or pirates or whatever they are camping out the resources that you want. You need to fight them off, start gathering your resources, and then continue to defend the resource against both other scouts, other bandits that might kind of fly in, and against other players who want to fight for those same resources. So I want something a little closer to that, and I want to play test that mechanic. It's why I'm working on the mobs, because I want to have mobs that you have to get rid of, and those mobs will continue to spawn while you're gathering your resources. So that's just an explanation for why I'm working on this strange mix of pathfinding and AI for mobs and scatter generation. That's a bit of an aside, but it's the insight you get by coming along and watching the streams. Okay, so generate scatter. I don't know what this is going to do, but it is going to have to mark scatter generated chunk coordinate. I feel like I can actually make this scatter generator class. I mean, these feel very static to me at the moment, but they're all taking the same parameter. So um, I'm going to call this a chunk scatter generator. 6. I'm going to pass the coordinate into a constructor. Does IntelliJ let me convert that to a private? Create a field? Yes, it does. Perfect. Thank you, IntelliJ. All right, so we don't need to pass these through anymore. And they're pretty straightforward. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is implement these has scatter generated and mark scatter generated methods. And the reason for that is, well, the reason for that is I need those to get the design of this right. At first, it will just generate no scatter, but it will record the fact that it has generated it. So we can just confirm that all of that is working. Yes, the 7 Days to Die. I really like the noise. It's not called noise. It's they call it heat. The heat mechanic. So the more disruption you cause within a particular area, the more likely you are to have zombies come along. The screamer mechanic is one that I do plan to emulate in one form or another. In the style of game I'm trying to make, I can imagine an idea of whatever the aggressive mob in the area is. We'll call it trolls for now. They will they'll send scouts out towards you, and it's those scouts that you really want to take out. If those scouts probably won't attack you, but if those scouts see you, then they could perhaps unleash a horde of trolls that will then kind of come and attack you. So by having skills that allow you to detect those scouts more easily, you can avoid the combat more easily. Um, and so that may well encourage the idea of multiple classes working together. So perhaps certain characters are much better at detecting scouts. And so they can kind of pick off the scouts before the scouts can bring in the more aggressive mobs. Or you could bring a tank along with you and, get the benefit of having the fighting going on around the resource gathering. But yeah, I very much enjoy 7 Days to Die, and there's a lot of great mechanics in there. Lots of bugs, but lots of great mechanics too. Um, okay. And I can't be one to criticize for lots of bugs, given the demo I just did of my pathfinding. Okay. What does my terrain service have access to? I need to persist something here. Um, so I've got two kinds of... Oh, what was that? That's not the window I wanted. Docker compose. There it is. Yeah, potentially plural. Uh, I kind of like the idea of the scout not hanging around. So obviously, for anyone who's not aware, in 7 Days to Die, the screamer is a particular kind of zombie that comes along and starts screaming. And while it's screaming, more zombies get attracted towards you. They spawn and get attracted towards you. The mechanic I'd be going for is the scouts. I'm trying to think of what game it's similar to. A little bit like Civ 6, where the barbarians will send scouts out. When the scouts come across your civilization, they don't hang around and call in more forces. They actually run away. Um, the moment they see you, they run away. And if you can't kill them, they'll head back to their original base. And at that point, they'll start unleashing a whole bunch of forces against you. Um, so I imagine scouts would be something that kind of trickle in one by one, but the trick would be getting rid of them before they escape. So I don't want them hanging around. It can be hilarious in 7 Days to Die when you do get 3 or 4 screamers, and the rate that new zombies come in at is just absolutely insane. It can be a great way of gathering experience in 7 Days to Die if you know what you're doing. All right, so I have my terrain service. It currently actually has its own Mongo database. That's interesting. Um, I don't have any of this configured. Oh, I do have it configured. Awesome. So yeah, I can store this in a Mongo database without having to change any of this. I have two kinds of persistence that I use. I've got Mongo and I've got Redis. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking of Redis as a true persistence layer. It's not. It's a caching layer. You should expect Redis to forget everything at any point in time. So never use Redis as your persistence. This will ultimately use Redis because, yeah, I don't want to have to be pulling stuff out of Mongo all the time. But for now, let's just push this into Mongo. I'm actually going to implement the Mongo schema directly in here. Now, I don't remember how to implement a Mongo schema, so I apparently need to load the models asynchronously. All right, I'm just going to copy this code here. Um, private static get Mongo models. This is an async. Can I put an async there? Maybe. Yes. And why do I do that? asynchronously. Not find name client. Oh, because get client is asynchronous. All right. Init Mongo just creates this. Okay. I'm not sure if Mongoose has built-in connection pooling. I would hope so. I'm going to assume it does. So the distinction there is I don't want to create a new connection to Mongo every single time we create one of these chunk scatter generators. If there's any sensibleness to the Mongoose library, then this would go and detect that we're already connected and probably just use a pool of connections. So I'm just going to assume that's the case. Client is, yeah, I'm not liking this being in this class. All right, change of plan. Let's create a Mongo service. We already have a Mongo service. In the terrain service. Oh, I've duplicated some code here. Okay, I'll just use this code. Fair enough. I don't need a vector schema. Because I'm not going to be storing the scatter in here, just to be clear. All we're going to store in this database is the terrain itself. We'll be storing meshes, potentially nav meshes, and whether or not we've created the terrain, the scatter. Now, whether or not we've created the scatter could probably equally live on the chunk itself. So this may end up changing. We'll just see how this goes. Scatter schema. This is just really straightforward. We've just got a chunk, which is where am I? I will need a chunk schema. I'll just copy and paste that. So the chunk will be a chunk schema. Don't need a transform. And all I need in here is a Boolean for generated. How do I do this? Mongoose.schema.types.boolean. I might as well try my hand at indexing this. I haven't done any indexes yet. I presume it's going to be type, and I presume it's indexed. Schema index. Index is true. I know I should be indexing things in the entity schema, but I'm not yet. So in here we need a model, which is just going to be scatter schema, and there we go. I believe that's everything I need to communicate with Mongo. So back in here, I can get rid of this code. I wasn't enjoying that. We can get rid of that code. So it has generated scatter. Okay, sorry, I'm changing plans in my head as I go. I'm not going to store this as a separate schema, like effectively a separate table. I am just going to have a chunk schema. And this is where chunk data can live. The scatter is really a property of the chunk. I can't get away from that in my mind. I just need to resolve the fact that if you go and delete a terrain chunk, it absolutely has to go and clean up the terrain scatter behind it. So I am going to do that. This will store all the height maps and things like that on it as well. Chunk schema, chunk. Oh, and this has the wrong name on it anyway. Okay, I think that's better. Models is the wrong type. That's chunk. Yeah, I think that's better. Okay. Just to improve my auto completion, I am just going to see what the return type of this is. This is a model of T. So I think that up in here, I can actually say chunk is a model of something called chunk. Maybe, what was T? Don't want to spend too long on getting this bit right. Model takes a name, a schema, let's just see what other people do here. Mongoose, TypeScript, model type. Here we go. Yep. So what I want to do is I want to define my chunk type. Export chunk, export interface chunk. Chunks are going to have a yeah, okay, this is going to be too much effort for now. I will leave it. We will leave this as a model of any. At least it knows it's a model. That needs to be chunk coordinate schema. I'll just call it UV schema. That one can be UV schema. Something just occurred to me that I saw in the proto format. There's no reason to send the W and S coordinates over the wire. They are completely, the W component is literally just minus U minus V. 0 minus U minus V. Likewise, the S component is basically the negative of the sum of the other two components. So they can be calculated. There's no reason to send those over the wire. So I am just going to clean that up because that's extra bits that we don't need to be sending through. Let's rename this type. This is probably going to make me have to update a whole bunch of code. But yeah, that was going to annoy me. Now, the reason I noticed that is in Mongo, I do need to store the W component. And the reason for that is it's needed to know how far two chunks are away from each other. So it's not possible to work out the distance between two chunks unless you have all three components. And to do those queries on the database, I need them all stored in the index. So that's just the way that's the reason I need to do that. Okay. I think this is now correct for the schema. Has generated, we can do a get Mongo models. Not right. Get Mongo models should return something called chunk. Oh, that's not a promise. I need to await that. Which means this needs to be async. I'd quite like to find a way of not doing this using asyncs. I need to have a bit of a think about how to do that. Because we can really just do this stuff as the server comes up. Like we should be able to get these models as the server comes up. Yeah, as I said, I'm just not sure exactly how to achieve that. So we get the Mongo models, and then I can just say chunk dot find one, having a chunk coordinate can't remember how to do these filters. How do I do it in the entity server? Mongo TS in the entity server. Get Mongo models gets called, where's an example? Instantiate prefab. Query, where's query? All right, so we get the Mongo models. We generate a query. And here's a sample query. I'm just going to grab that. The query here will be a lot simpler because we're not checking within a range here. We're just checking. We don't need the centroid. We already know which chunk we are. The Mongo query what's Mongo query? It is just an any. We just want $eq. And then we give it the value, which is going to be this dot underscore chunk coordinate dot u. So I can simplify this heaps. I can just go straight to location.chunk. It's not location.chunk, it is literally just chunk coordinate. Equal to this. Easy. And the same for V, the same for W. That dot U. These need to be dot U. Dot V. Dot W. We don't even need to compare the dot W. We know that that will match. All right. What does it do with that query? In this case, it generates the query and then it just runs a .find. So we want chunk.find one, Mongo Query, wait on that, and then we grab the chunk. All right. So has generated scatter is really just a matter of going return chunk dot what did I call the property? I called it scatter generated. Nice. Mark scatter generated is going to be really quite similar. We grab that. This needs to be an await, an async, sorry. Same query. Oops, that should be a V. And that should be a V. Now, this is a bit funny because I need to, it seems plausible that we're not going to have the chunk generated at this point. But that's a bit of a weirdness. Yeah, okay. If the chunk isn't generated, then yeah, I need to create this record. So that can be my query, but I need to do like an upsert, it's called. So to keep things simple, I am going to put in the third parameter here because I want this record to get created if it doesn't already exist, and I do want the W coordinate. This will just allow me to do queries of chunks within a range. Chunk equals, we want to do an update. This is going to be scatter generated is going to be true. And I think I've got an upsert. There we go. Upsert is true. So that will cause it to create the record if it doesn't already exist, I think. All right. Generate scatter. Let's actually say if not has generated scatter, then go off and do something to do generate scatter. And then mark the scatter as generated. Okay, so for now, all I'll do is I'll do a log.info generating scatter. Make it nice and obvious that that line has come up. Import not from entity source util config. This needs to be from config and log from, can't remember what I called it, I54 base, I54 common. Most of those went away. There we go. Okay. So what have we got from the logic point of view here? We've got if the scatter hasn't been generated, log, regardless, mark the scatter as generated. Well, we only need to do that in here. Okay. So now I can come back. I need a way of clearing this flag. I'll just do it by blowing away the database at the moment. there's a way I can do that from inside Docker. So this still has a compile error, which is that has generated scatter does not return a boolean. Oh yeah, this needs to be a promise of boolean. Oops. That's got all the TypeScript issues resolved. Do I have any warnings I care about? No. All right. So now the chunks controller, when we get a chunk, I'm just going to create a new chunk scatter generator for the chunk coordinate. Const scatter equals that. Scatter dot generate scatter. So what I'm expecting now is if I call the chunk endpoint, I'm expecting it to log that it's generating the scatter. And if I call it a second time, then it won't. So let's try it. Run this. I need to make sure my game's not running. This is going to cause all sorts of problems in a moment. Just going to close this down. Bring up this. I think I've got a chunk. Have I got? Here we go. Here is a command to generate the origin chunk. Hit enter on it. It generated a chunk for us. Oh, that's a lot of debug. That is not what I wanted. What on earth is that? A lot of traffic coming out of the terrain Mongo instance. I'll grab the logs. Docker compose log terrain persist. No, terrain 1, I think is what I want. No. Logs. We have no logs. That doesn't seem right. Oh, I know exactly what it is. It is terrain _1. Nope. Ah. The wrong key somewhere in there. Why can't I get my logs? Is it just terrain? Yep, there we go. And that was unhappy anyway. I'm surprised we got anything out of the endpoint. That's quite impressive. So cannot read properties of null, reading scatter generated. So chunk was null, which makes sense because we did not have that chunk in the database. All right. As that, so await that, and this just needs to be a question mark dot that or false. Okay. Let's hit up that endpoint again. Wow, that generates a lot of output. Rain service was started. Hmm. Restart everything. We should see this debug message. In fact, I'm just going to tear the stack down as well. So docker compose down, that just deletes all my databases. So now when we start it up again, it'll go and recreate all the databases. We'll hit that endpoint. It said checking if scatter has been generated quite a few times in there. We'll grab the logs. Wow. I don't know why that would have happened so many times. And weirdly, it never said that it was generating the scatter. Okay, so two problems. The most pressing one is the fact that that function is running so many times. Just confirm again that it does it again. If I hit that endpoint, yep, we can see it hit the, it just got lots and lots and lots of stuff. I'd say that I'm calling that inside a loop, probably for every voxel rather than go turn the chunk. Yes, it is exactly what we're doing there. Generate scatter is happening for every single hex within the chunk. So this should be chunk equals that. So what was this actually returning? Yeah, that's fine. Do that and then return chunk. Fingers crossed. Do that. That was a lot faster. Not doing many hundreds of hits on. Checking if scatter has been generated. All right. I will bring the stack down just to clear out these logs. It's probably a better way of clearing out logs, but this works, and it means I know I've got a clean slate. Bring that up. Can I get a log view from in here? Services. I think from services, I can get a log view. Okay, Docker, containers, not services, terrain, services, terrain, log. All right, so I can look at the log just for the terrain service here. That's handy. I hit up that endpoint. Let's not get the mesh. Let's just get the chunk. That could well be an issue. Checking if scatter has been generated, but then doing nothing. All right, breakpoint time. Chunk scatter generator. We know. I see the problem. This is an async function. So I have to await on it. I really don't like having all these awaits in my code. I mean, we're going to need some in here because we are calling out to Mongo. In fact, I mean, this really does have to have an await. There's nothing I can do about that because this is IO bound code. All right. We hit the chunk again, come down here, yep, crashed, why? Stop it. Bring the service down. Grab the logs for the terrain service, hit the endpoint, and it crashed. Oh, it is generating the scatter at least. Path chunk coordinate.w is not in schema. All right. Hello, Treemosha. Welcome. Good to have someone commenting from Twitch. We don't often get the Twitch people chatting, so welcome. Currently working on my survival crafting MMO. Working on getting terrain scatter, so trees and stones and things being generated on the server. Excellent. It's the best way of doing it. Get a bit of work done with. It's like listening to like the radio on in the background, except you have to put up with my voice. Okay. So it didn't like chunk coordinate.w, and the reason is this needs to be chunk coordinate. It'd be nice if it's that simple. Restart it. Now hitting up that endpoint, it didn't successfully mark the terrain as generated, so I should get in here, checking if the scatter's been generated, generating scatter, and then if I hit the endpoint again, I'm expecting that it will check it but not regenerate it. There we go. So I checked it, didn't regenerate it. So it is successfully marking chunks as having their scatter generated. Of course, I need a way of clearing that out. So I'm doing that the dodgy, hacky way at the moment, which is just to bring down the entire Docker stack. When I bring it back up, we should get, it should regenerate it. Let's see if that worked. And there we go, it regenerated the scatter. Excellent. Now I will put an endpoint on to clear that bit, because I don't want yeah, I don't want to have to do that every time. That's a pain. Chunk scatter generator, just fix that typo. Public async, let's just say remove scatter. So what this is going to do, it's going to do two things. It's going to call out to the entity service, ultimately, to do delete the scatter entities. And then it will go and clear the scatter generated bit. So I know how to do that already. We just come in here. We'll do an upsert, but with a false. Did it not like that? It didn't like that. Oh, I've got a typo. I'm referring to the old spelling of generator. Generator. Normally, IntelliJ is really good at fixing that. I don't know why it didn't in this case. Okay, so then on my routes, I'll add a new route in here to allow me to clear the scatter. So I'll just do a chunks router dot route :u :v scatter dot delete. So this will let me just hit up an endpoint and remove that scatter. What did I call it? Delete scatter. Just copy and paste most of this. That's copy and pasteable. Do that. Then I've got the chunks controller dot do a delete scatter coordinate, and then res.status. What's this? I think it's just accepted that you normally send through in response to a deletion. Delete scatter, create the method. Oh, that's not what I want. Yes, it is. Chunks coordinate. Chunk scatter generator for the coordinate. Dot remove the scatter. Okay. This needs to be async. This needs to await it. All right. I will change this to use the const style. I really prefer. I have no idea. There's not a huge difference between functions and constants, but for some reason, I find this style a lot more obvious. There we go. Testing time. So if I hit that endpoint, we can see that it checked if the scatter generated but didn't actually generate. If I now hit the scatter endpoint and request a deletion, it does absolutely nothing. What on earth happened there? Hello, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that. Ikoana. Hello and welcome to the stream. I'm currently working on my survival crafting MMO, and at the moment taking some code that I had on the client, which was to generate trees and stones throughout the world for harvesting, and porting that code across to the server so that the clients can all agree on which stones have been picked up, which trees have been harvested. I don't know why this isn't working though. I'm trying to just putting in some code to let me more easily test. Okay, this needs to be in a wait. More easily mark different chunks in the game as having their scatter, their stones and trees generated, and remove that flag. Just make it a lot easier to test. Feel free, for anyone new here, feel free to ask any questions. I quite like to engage a lot with the audience, and I'm sure no one minds me repeating stuff that I've already covered. Still not working. I await the deletion scatter. I'm just going to get a breakpoint in here and just see what's hanging. Oh, no, I can see it already. I forgot to send the result. You have to do a send. Don't need the breakpoint. We hit up delete. It stopped because I stopped the service. Delete. Now when I go and fetch that chunk again, check the logs, we see that we checked, generated the scatter, get it again. We check we don't generate the scatter one last time just to make sure everything's okay. And now it does regenerate the scatter. Perfect. Thank you, Akuana. I'm really looking forward to getting some players in as well. There's still a fair bit of work to do before we can do that, but my goal is to test this resource gathering mechanic that I'm working on, which will involve clearing out mobs and defending your territory while you gather resources. Let's see. Okay, let's find what I've said over in Trello. Well, this is a really bad plan. I've kind of not quite checked off any of these. We've kind of got chunk persistence. What I was intending to mean for chunk persistence here, though, is I wanted it to persist, all of the height maps and materials and things as well. But I don't think I'll bother doing that yet. So let's get further into the scatter generation. I think the best way of doing this is to actually take the client-side scatter generation code and port it across from C# to TypeScript. It's while they're very, very different languages, I find that that it's really not difficult to port between the two. Where is my editor for C#? Again, for anyone new here, it's a little bit confusing that my C# and TypeScript editors look very similar. I use JetBrains products. This is one called Rider. A lot of people expect the devloggers to use VS Code, but I'd rather poke myself in the eye. Okay. Where's my scatter generator? Got to remind myself what this actually does. How much code have we got here? 160 lines. That's not too bad. So the first thing it does is it finds these subcomponents called scatter generator rules. And we have two different kinds of rules. There are ones that are randomized and ones that are deterministic. I remember doing a devlog on this. Let's just bring up the editor so that we can see some examples of when I used random and when I used deterministic. So I tended to use deterministic for items. I'm going to scatter. Stones is a scatter generator rule. And you can see that it is not randomized. So what this is aiming to do is anytime it reloads this chunk, it will try to place the stones in exactly the same spot. And this is really a hack in the way that I developed the scatter in my original client code. When I unload chunks, I also unload all of the entities that are in them. And so when you reload it, I want it to make sure that those scatter entities get generated in the same spot. It was really a way of me not having to worry about entity persistence. For mobs, on the other hand, you don't want them always generating in the same spot, so I requested that they be randomized. Other than that, these rules say how many items there's allowed to be per chunk. A probability, I think that's a probability of any given hex having one of these items in it, and then an altitude range that that item is allowed to exist at. I don't know why I made the stones only appear so high up, but I did. So I don't think I need the concept of deterministic versus non-deterministic. And the reason is we have a persistence store for our entities now. So we can always do things just randomly. So the first time it generates a chunk, it will randomly generate the items within there. It will persist them, and they'll just always be there until they get uh, changed. Now there will need to be a mechanism to replenish resources like stones, but that is a problem for later. I just want the general mechanic working for now. So where is my scatter generator gone? Scatter. Here we go. I'm just going to write some pseudocode here. We need to do for each rule, whatever a rule is. I suspect that's going to be a YAML file somewhere. For each rule, I'm only going to port the randomize code. I'm not going to do the deterministic code. So all this does is it adds it on startup, it adds it into this list of rules that it's going to be processing. What do we have then? Disable, generate, it must be in the, all right, I'd say that it's this generate function. So we only care about the non-deterministic one. So this generate returns an action. I am not sure how this is working. Ah, yes, I remember. I have two phases to a lot of my generation code on the client. And the reason for it is things can take a while to run, especially when I was doing terrain generation on the client. Hello, Aaron Demguy, welcome back. I started early today. I've moved on from pathfinding and I'm now back onto scatter generation, but porting it across to the server. So I've been going about an hour and a half now, a little under an hour and a half. When I generate things on the client, or when I was generating things on the client, things could take a while. So I do them on a background thread. But some things can't happen on background threads. And so I use this slightly strange pattern where I have things return a function. So they will go and do as much generation as they can when I call this, but anything they need to happen on the main thread, they actually just bundle up into a function and then return that as what I call a completion. So my generate goes off and calls the randomize and the deterministic generation functions, collects anything it needs to do to actually inject those items into the world, because that has to happen on the main thread on the client. And then this whole thing returns a function that executes those cleanup functions one after the other. So I don't need to use this pattern on the server because the server is single-threaded, well, distributed and single-threaded within its individual instances. But the client is going to become more and more single-threaded as time goes on anyway. So I'm going to ignore all of this. We can look at the only generate function I'm going to bring across, which is the random completion one. Here it is here. The amount of code I'm going to have to port is getting smaller and smaller. I like it. So this goes and, sorry, I just need to check a message. Oh, that's all good. This goes and works out all the things it needs to do. It takes its rules and it just keeps track of how many items it has generated under that rule and just keeps those in this to-dos list. It then grabs every single hex within the chunk. Anyone new here? My chunks are hexagon based. All my tiles are hexagon based. Even my chunks are hexagonal. Then for each one of those slices, as long as we still have things in our to-do list, it chooses okay, yep. So no, it doesn't iterate over each chunk in order, each hex in order. What it actually does is it just runs this loop as many times as there are hexes, and it shuffles in a random hex. So it's intentionally processing the hexes in random order. It then checks what the height is of the terrain, finds something in the to-do list that is compatible with that, and then randomly generates a random number to handle the probability. So we don't want it to just always put a tree in if the tree is compatible. We want it to say, all right, there's a 5% chance of a tree generating in any given spot. So that's implemented there. And then, what's this doing? Oh, yes, this is just finding which of the scatter rules is valid. If there are any, then it chooses one, updates the to-do list, and then continues on its merry way. Now, this is the completion function coming out the back, which we can really ignore. And the reason is, hello, Griffith, welcome back. I've moved on from pathfinding and am now working on porting my scatter generation, so the tree and stone generation code, back across to the server. So this completion function, it doesn't need to happen on the main thread anymore. This is just going to call out to the entity service to store the entities. And that really is just going to be a post into the entity service. So I'm not even going to worry about looking at that code. Catch you around, Aaron M. Guy. Thank you for popping in. Okay, so I'm going to port this code. I'm going to, okay, so for each rule, add it to to-do list. Oh, don't make it a to-do. Yeah, it'll do. For each hex in random order, find compatible rules. Choose a random rule and then instantiate it. Instantiate it and update the to-do list. Okay. I'm actually going to start by defining the rules, just so that I have some data to go on. Now, these rules probably belong in a database somewhere, but I am going to put them in some YAML. In fact, I'm going to cheat and just put them in my configuration YAML. But yeah, these probably belong in a database so that they can be updated and tuned and all that kind of stuff without having to redeploy the terrain services. So scatter, let's do rules. Now, what do rules have? They have a prefab. Bringing up Unity just so that I can port the ones I already have across. So let's have one called Spruce. It has 10 per chunk. It has a probability of 1%. And it has a height range of 24 to 32. Max height is 32. So there's the spruce. Let's do another one. Insert, shift, insert. Let's do a shrub next. Let's do raspberry. It's a 2%, 20 to 32. At 20 to 32. So that's our raspberry shrubs and stones. I won't do mob scatter yet because they won't be scattered. They'll use some sort of spawning logic instead. So here, if I take the round stone and this is 10%, 17 to 22. And then the flat stone is going to be 10%, 16 to 19. Do there. What have I done? There we go. Stone. Sorry, what did I say? I said 16 to 19. Might bring my spruce trees down a bit because we just don't have much high terrain near spawn, so I do want to see the stuff actually run. All right. So that's what my rules are going to look like. So first step, loaded the rules. Now this is really easy in with my infrastructure. I can just do config.scatter.rules is literally the rules. Now I want to convert this to a to-do list. Do is going to be equal to rules.map. Going to bring up, I'm going to readjust my screen here a bit actually, so that I can have both bits of code on the screen at the same time. There's that one. Get rider up sitting over that side. Get rid of some of these extra views I don't need. Need any of that. And I realize my face is about to get in the way a little bit. What I'll do then, I will just move my face quickly. Let's see, how do I do that? Let's bring me over to there. There we go. Okay, so yep, that's not my face occluding that. That's just, well, it's about to be my face occluding it. All right, that is enough. So the to-do list literally just has the reference to the rule and how many we've generated. So let's do a rule and a count is 0. All right, there's our to-do list. This is why I like TypeScript. I mean, this is so much simpler than writing code like that. At least in my mind, although apparently mine doesn't compile. Oh no, that's right. Yeah, I might take it back. Why? There we go. And you know, just editing that YAML was really easy, rather than having to go and configure it in the Unity UI. I know these are little things, but I don't know. I'm easily easily impressed. So what the code does is it goes and grabs the list of hexes within the chunk, and just as a reminder for everyone what this ordering is, it uses this hex mod ordering. Where's a better view? Here we go. Within a chunk, it's an arbitrary ordering. It does follow in straight lines, but this is the order that I'm pulling out here. As I keep on saying, it has some really nice properties. This is covered in, I think it's episode 13 of the devlog series. But the only reason I'm doing this is because I just need some order to process these in. I don't want them in that order. I want them to be in a random order. So easiest way to do that, I just need a list of numbers from 0 up to the number of hexagons in random order. Let's see, const hex mods is going to be equal to array coordinate system dot chunk area. That is the number of hexes. Dot, I think I need to convert that to a list. I think dot keys. I think that will give me all the numbers 0 through 200 and whatever. And then is there a shuffle? No, there's no shuffle algorithm. In which case I'm just going to do this myself. I did the shuffle myself over here. It's a shuffling while iterating a list is a really straightforward piece of code to write. So let's see, we're going to do for let I equal to 0, I less than coordinate system dot area, and to do dot length greater than 0, increment I. Then perform the shuffle. All we have to do is grab an item, I think. Next. Yes, okay. I need to get that code back that I had before. Const hex mods is going to be equal to array coordinate system dot chunk radius dot keys. So that's just the list. All we do now is we choose a random number. Random number between minimum and maximum. So this is going to be between I and coordinate system dot chunk radius. Oops. I'm just going to confirm that this is this is inclusive and exclusive. I'd be very surprised if it's not. Min. Yes, inclusive, exclusive. Perfect. So what this is doing is choosing a random hex mod after our current location. And then we are going to splice that in. So that's going to be hex mods I, hex mods J, is going to be equal to hex mods J, hex mods I. It's just going to swap two items around, and now we're just going to process the next one at the position we are. So const, const x is going to be an axial coordinate from, no, not from vector, dot. How do I not have a dot from hexmod? There it is. Axial coordinate from hexmod hex mods I. So that's the hex we're going to process. So all we're doing is just each time around this loop, we're just choosing a random hex mod, moving it to the next spot in our array, and then we're going to process it. This is just so that we don't get any. It allows us to implement our limits, like our only 10 trees per chunk type of thing, without giving any bias to earlier hexes in the chunk. Otherwise, you'd end up with weird striping because of the way hex mod works. Next, so I've got that. So we're going to need the height map at this point. This code is just checking that we actually have a height. We know that's the case the way we're storing data in the server. So where's the chunk? Do I have the chunk yet? I don't. Get chunk. So we'll load in the chunk. Is that an async? No. That really should be an async, because that's going to start getting stuff out of Mongo soon. It'll change when I do it. The code won't work otherwise. Okay, so we get the chunk. We then need to grab the height. Const hex mod equals that. So I'm going to use that again. That's going to be equal to the chunk hex mod dot height. There we go. We've got the terrain height. That's all this code here was doing. It was just filling in this topmost thing from this topmost for slice. So we've just already know the height from our data structures. It's then going to choose which items in the to-do list are allowed to get instantiated in this spot. So we just go to-dos dot filter. Now this code is non-deterministic. I'll explain why in a moment. To-dos dot filter. Did I not call it to-dos? Right, let's just change that. There we go. To-dos dot filter. To do goes to. Const rule equals to do. Really doesn't like my functions, does it? Okay. Here's our rule. We've got our height. So we just need to say return height is less than or equal to, I can just copy and paste this code pretty much. Y becomes height. So we check that the height is within the bounds. We can also specify a max height of -1, which just says we don't care about the maximum height. And here is it checking the minimum height. Then here's where it becomes non-deterministic. The rule has this probability And this is just saying, what are the chances of a given tile having this particular kind of scatter? Now, it's a bit funny because just because it passes this probability check doesn't mean that it will be instantiated here, because the different kinds of scatter do need to compete with each other. So it's not so much a percentage chance that we put in probability, but rather just something to tune the rate that things come in at. Random. How do you get a random value between 0 and 1? Anyone feel free to let me know in the chat if you can respond before me doing a search. Random number between 0 and 1. Math.random. Returns between 0 and 1. Yeah, I had a feeling Griffith was going to be the one to get it, but we've got a bit of lag here. All right. So we have found all of the things in the current to-do list that are able to be spawned here and meet their probability. Candidates. All right. Then what do I do? So that's the valid scatters. I'm calling it candidates. That's fine. We then need to choose a random item out of the valid scatters. So if candidates.length greater than 0, then const scatter in candidate index be random int between 0 and candidate dot length. So that gives us the index of the to-do. Now here it goes off and chooses which direction it's going to face. I'm going to ignore that for now. I'm just going to have everything facing the one way for now. Now, this code uses these, what it calls manifests. I don't really need to do that. All it's doing is it's just storing, well, where does it want to place something? Because this is running in another thread. This is not on the main thread. So this code is unable to instantiate the prefabs. Whereas over here, I can go and construct the objects that I'm going to be throwing into the entity store. And then I can just go and pass them all off into the entity store. I don't need to worry about the threading here. But what it does need to do is it needs to store the fact that that rule can go. Let's just go const rule is going to be equal to do's. That is that right? To-dos stores the rules themselves. No, it stores the to-dos. Let's go accepted candidate is going to be equal to that. This is a bit funny. I wish I had references in JavaScript now, but it's because I can't do that, because I need to go and update that rule over in the to-do list. So I need its index so that I can go and look it up. In fact, I need its index from and it's indexed into the to-do list to begin with. This is unfortunate. I think filter will give me an index as well. Will it? Filter. Yes, it will pass me the index. So we've got the to-do index. And in fact, the candidates, I might as well just store that index itself. In fact, I need to store that index itself. So I am going to start by doing a map. I could probably do this with a reduce more effectively. In fact, yes, I'm going to do this with a reduce. Result, comma, to do, comma, to do index. And that is going to map to some function. It's going to start with an empty list for the candidates, and all we are going to do is we're going to say, we're going to take this filter logic that I had before. And instead, we're going to say, hey, if this is true, then return the existing results and the new index. Oh, what did I just press? I keep on pressing F1. I've got to stop doing that. Otherwise, just return the results as they were. Right, I've got some serious missing braces and things here, but I'll hopefully get to those here. What have I done? Reduce result. Left side of comma is unused. No, it's not. There we go. That's slightly better. If I'm missing a bracket there, still looking better. I think I need to give it the type of this, which is going to be a number array. That is meant to be result. I actually think that changing that to result is going to do most of it. There we go. Okay, so what this is actually doing is it is taking the to-dos, so things that we still need to process. Let me just reformat this code. There we go. And then for each item in here, if it is valid, then append its index within the to-do list into the list of candidates. So list of candidates is just going to be the indices of the valid to-dos in here. So now I can say to-do index is going to be equal to candidates, which is going to choose a random item out of the candidates. We now have its index within the to-do list, and I can just say to-dos dot to-dos to-do index dot count, and we can just increment that. if what did I call this? It was just max per chunk. I just need to look up the remove operation just to see exactly what it takes. JS remove item from array. Well, I know it's index. Can we do that? I've looked this up before. Array.remove index. Find the index and then remove it with splice. All right, I'm going to do this. They really don't make it easy to remove items from arrays in JavaScript, do they? I'm going to double check what the documentation says. Index of and splice. But splice. Oh, okay. So splice does remove the item. My issue was I don't want to return a new array because I'm trying to do this in place. Uh, I just need to still look up the actual documentation. I just need to understand what splice does. By removing or replacing existing elements in place. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I need to give it, oh, just the start and the delete count. So if I just give it, if you could correct me if I'm wrong here, I just call splice, give it the index and a delete count of 1 and nothing else, and that should do what I want, I believe. Specific typings to my TS config. Okay, I may have already done that. We'll see. To do index 1. So far, so good. Okay. I have a feeling this is working. I've got a compile error here. That should be to-dos. I no longer use that value. Why not? Oh, I'll be about to use that. And in fact, I only need to instantiate that at the point that I'm going to instantiate an item at the location. So I need a list of items to be created. And in here, we just push a new one in. Okay. Uh, yes, this is pretty straightforward, I think. I need to create the actual prefabs. So I'll do that next. Um, I will for now just comment out these ones so that I can focus on a single item. I'll bring this way down to 17 just so that we can be sure that we're going to get some. And we need a spruce prefab. Easiest way of doing that is going to be to grab the troll, copy it to spruce, and then this is not a mob. This is going to be an item. Model is going to be spruce. It is not an agent. Doesn't have any state. What else would I store on an item like a spruce? I guess I'm going to need to have all my harvestable components, but I can do those later. Yeah, I know you can change prototypes on built-in types, but I can't take myself there. I quite like the C# way of doing that with the extension methods. I don't mind that as much. I mean, it's the same thing, I guess. And my coffee's cold. Okay, so I've got a spruce prefab. It doesn't have any of its harvestable stuff on it yet. That is definitely not in scope. Um, so, I mean, I really just need to store the location and the prefab, I think. Um, so let's do that. Location is going to be hex. Chunk. Yeah, that sounds like a cleaner way of doing it, Griffith. That is not nearly as hacky as the way you first described it. What is our chunk coordinate? Oh, there it is. So location is going to be a chunk and a hex. Oh, we need a height as well. We need a prefab, which is going to be just the to do index dot rule to do's dot prefab. Might as well do the rotation stuff that I decided not to port, but it's pretty easy to do at this point. We just go rotation is going to be x0, y, math.random, times by math.pi times 2, I guess. Oh no, I store stuff in degrees, don't I? That was close. 60 and z colon 0. I should probably do my. I've been talking for a while about making a change where I stop storing Euler angles and move to proper quaternions in the database, but still haven't got around to that. To do's index prefab. I don't know what I was doing there. Why I thought I'd have braces. Okay. So at this point, items contains all the parameters to be passed. I've not looked up GL matrix. I'm aware of its existence, but I've not really considered using it for much, given I'd have to, I presume I'd have to be wrangling things in and out. So unless I'm doing lots of vector maths in parallel, my assumption was that I wouldn't get the benefit from it anyway. But I may well look into that to see if it's worth it, just to avoid having to do my own quaternion maths. I'm not doing my own quaternion maths. I've got someone else doing that, don't I? Yeah, I don't know what my library can use, just plain arrays. Yeah, I've got a library that does the quaternion for me. I'm not sure if it does GL under the covers or not. Um, items contains all the parameters to be passed. So all I've got to do is promise.all and then I need to give it a list of promises. Items.map, item goes to. So yep, we do need to await that. Yeah, I'm aware that there's actually a potential issue in here where it could go and create the scatter. Something could crash in here and then this might not run. I've got issues like that all through my code. So I'm not going to address those yet. It's going to be a long process fixing up all the consistency issues. The approach I plan to use is probably putting a component on these entities at the time they're created, just to kind of mark them as being part of a scatter operation. And so we can detect them later and clean them up if this doesn't actually execute. Yeah, I've got a feeling the one I'm using, the library I'm using is probably, it's because it uses arrays, npm Turnian, I think it's called. I wonder if it's GL under the covers. I'm just going to quickly check that. It doesn't seem to be. But yeah, it is GL. It is, sounds very similar. Quickly check if they have a dependency on GL matrix. Package JSON. No, they don't. Yeah, so maybe I should be using that. Uh, um, I think I was just saying that I was wondering whether or not quaternion was based on GL matrix, but it doesn't look like it is. Yeah, I was just curious. Okay. The other thing I was saying is that this is potentially inconsistent if the code crashes in here, but I have a plan to clean that up. All. Okay, so an item needs to go out to the entity client. Let's just create an entity client in here. Yeah, I do appreciate it, Griffith. I do like to know all the various things that are out there. I mean, I'm very, while I've done a lot of JavaScript, it's just been web and mobile stuff. I've not done much TypeScript and certainly no heavy computing in JavaScript before. Right, so I've got an entity client. I need to do an await entity client dot. Do I have anything to do with prefabs in here? No. Instantiate prefab. This is going to take, obviously, the prefab. It's going to take the location. I'm actually going to do a const prefab, comma, dot, 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 params equal to item. And then I can actually just pass the prefab. And then I can pass all of the parameters in one other go. Okay. Seem to have had more consistent viewer numbers today, I just noticed. The last couple of days have been pretty quiet. We've got a couple of people in Twitch and we've consistently had a few people in YouTube, which is great to see. I would still keep streaming even if no one were here, so no one feel compelled to be here. I find it's good for my productivity to just talk through what I'm doing. And people watch the streams afterwards, believe it or not. All right. We're going to await that. I need to implement this. Instantiate prefab. We need prefab, which is a string. And I need params, which I'm going to make in any. Now, I think that I actually need to pull out the location separately here. And the reason for that is entity controller. Controller. I've got to be more consistent about my pluralization, but hey. In the controller, instantiate prefab. It itself takes the prefab. Hey, that should be a string. It takes a coordinate, which is a full chunk hex and y coordinate, and then it takes any other details. This does allow me to specify rotations already. So this needs a location. And then I called it details on the controller, so I'll keep consistent naming there. Into the entity route, entities route. Just gonna let it clean stuff up. Entities route goes to here. U, V, Q, and R. What's R? Oh, R is R is one of the hex coordinates. I'm just surprised that I don't have a Y coordinate in here, but I'd say that I've implemented it so that it looks up the actual Y value. So I might put a second call in here. that includes the y coordinate, because if the client knows the y coordinate, we might as well just trust it. No point in recomputing that, because that would involve a call back out to the terrain service. Over in here, y gets set to -1. So in here, I should be able to go request.params.y or -1. Doesn't like that. Oh, because that's got to be a parsint. You can fly? I'm not sure. Oh, yes. If you, all you got to do is, well, you can't fly using this endpoint, but you could make a flying troll. Especially given there's no authentication on these endpoints. Yep, you could make a flying troll. That was actually one of the issues people saw when I had the troll was appearing in the ground for a moment while I was working on pathfinding, and that was actually the code was pulling the height map back from the terrain server, but everything's out by 1 because the height map actually refers to the voxel y coordinate, but of course the ground appears at the top of the voxel, whereas the voxel coordinate refers to the bottom of the voxel. So I have had bugs where things appear a meter off the ground or a meter into the ground. It seems to be a recurring thing for me. Instantiate prefab. So yeah, this is looking pretty easy. I just do response is going to be await to the client. We're going to do a post. HD's route is going to be this one. Might as well copy it. I don't think I'm allowed the slash on the start though. The Chi library is really strange that it won't let me specify the leading slash. It finds that, it complains if I do that. But we need to break these out. So let's change this to a template. It's my template. Double quoted string, place with template string. This is going to get a bit long, but we're going to go location.chunk .uv.u location.uv.v feels location.qr.q, and let's just copy that. Not my most efficient typing going on here. qr.r, and yes, I then need another one, which is just location.y. Now, I'm not passing the right type through here yet, but I'll get to that in just a moment. There we go, that fits on a line, even better. So there is the URL we're going to hit. I then need to give it a body, which I think is just details. I'll double check the route for that. So we come into here, and details is just the request.body. Excellent. All right. We get the response. I'm not going to bother actually reading the response. Do check the result. I am just trying to get this working for now. Just give me one moment. I just need to quickly grab a jacket before I freeze to death over here. Sorry about that. It's not a terribly cold day in Sydney today, but I live in quite an old house, and it can get pretty cold in the room I'm in. Oh, right. Is that really it? I think that's it. I need to pass through this coordinate properly. Um, so let's do that next. Yeah, whereabouts in Australia are you, Griffith, if you don't mind sharing? Melbourne. Yeah. Yeah, it can, I imagine it gets pretty cold there. Yeah, it's just been a freezing winter here in Sydney and wet, really wet. The whole year's been wet in Sydney today. This year, sorry. Okay, this is going to pass through. I mean, I don't really need to store this here. So we're always generating for a single chunk. So let's just do a new coordinate. This dot chunk coordinate, new axial, item dot pull out the location. I'm going to just strip it all out in here. I do like JavaScript's deconstruction operator sometimes. I might overuse it sometimes, allegedly. Stop B, comma, Y. What is wrong here? Expect 3 arguments, but got 4. Yep, here we go. We can't await, obviously. I have to return that. Okay. That looks like it compiles. I'm going to try this. Now, I'm not expecting anything to work in the client yet because it doesn't support any entities other than trolls at this point coming from the server. But we should get lots and lots and lots of entities in the database. Wait for everything to come up. That looks pretty healthy. So I'm going to get a chunk and watch everything crash. No, that didn't crash. Really? I am highly suspicious. Let's grab a look at the entities. Well, that is more expected. So I guess the question is, why did it not generate anything? I'm first of all going to tell it to clear the scatter flag so that it can regenerate the scatter. I will re-request the chunk. Get the chunk, get the to-dos. We have a single to-do. That's good. I'll move my head again. Get that over there. Go. Um, okay, so then we've got items is empty. We've got hex mods is a nice big array, hopefully, of only 7. Did I turn down the... I never turned back up my my chunk radius is there. Oh, that's meant to be chunk area. That wouldn't help. We may have actually gotten unlucky. That's a few enough hexagons that it tried populating that we may have just lucked out and not gotten any. There's also the fact that I should check the heights of these to make sure that we will be getting... What are our heights? They're all kind of down around 17, 20. What was the rule I put on the spruce trees? 17. So we should definitely be seeing some, only a 1% chance. Let's bump that way up. Hit that up. I will just step through some of this. Hex mods looks a lot healthier now. We've come through a couple of cases. We've got that should not be chunk radius, that should be chunk area. Welcome back, R&M guy. You have only missed out on me just kind of plowing through the implementation, just testing it out for the first time now. It should be generating spruce trees. But I've got a few cases where I've used the wrong constants, so let's see how I go. We grab that chunk again, we come on through J, this time it's going to try the 53rd hex within the chunk. It swaps them around, and you can see down in here that it's brought index 53 to the start of the array, and index 0 will be down over here. So this is just part of our shuffling. So hex mod should be 53, yes. Height, it's just probably 17, yes. And then we grab our candidates. So I expect a single candidate here. 0 or 1 candidates. It could be either, because we've only got a 10% chance of generating that tree. The candidates.length is not greater than 0, so we just come around the loop again. I'll just keep on going through here. Candidates is empty. I'm going to check why candidates is not populating. Oh, no, candidates has something in it here, right? Here we go. It's saying, hey, the spruce tree, which is index 0 of the to-do, is a valid candidate. So now we're going to come in. It's just hit the 10% chance of generating a tree. It's going to randomly choose a valid to-do, which is, it's only got one possibility. We grab the hex, which is 06. I presume this has a hex mod of 53. Just make sure that's true. Hex dot hex mod is 6. Oh, that's probably fine. No, it's not fine. Yes, it is. We're on this iteration of the loop. We're about to generate a tree really close to origin. We push an item in, and then we crash. All right, what happened there? Max per chunk is not defined on to-dos.rule. Doesn't make sense. That is meant to be to-dos to do index. Okay, that crash will have stopped it from recording the scatter as generated. So I'll just run it again. I'm going to get rid of my breakpoint. I'm a bit more confident now because I've seen it try to generate a tree. Fingers crossed. Oh. So it failed calling out to the entity service. And we should have a nice error message out of the entity server. Entity server said, oh, colon prefab. Yeah, that's, oh, yeah, that's a bit silly. I know exactly what that is. This should be $prefab. All right, again, that crashed before we marked the chunk as generated, so I shouldn't need to clear anything out. In fact, I probably don't even need to rerun this server. I think this one's correctly watching all of its dependencies. Entity validation failed. Transform position dot x. I am a bit confused there as to why that didn't work. I'm going to have to put a breakpoint in the entity service. I've obviously got an assumption. How do I make my trolls? It's a really short command line to make the trolls, right? Yeah. I'm just going to watch what that request is as it comes into the entity controller, entities controller. So as the instantiate prefab comes in, make sure that I'm at a reasonable place for this. On error. I mean, this is an unhandled exception. Let's just give it a go. So while we're waiting for this breakpoint to get hit, got quite a few people in at the moment. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I do a fortnightly devlog. This week's episode will be about pathfinding. What is happening here? How can I not be hitting this breakpoint? Oh, entities control. I'm trying to debug the terrain service. Entity service. Stop. Start. My coffee is beyond cold now. Okay, again, that logging was very suspicious. That seemed to call, it seemed to be checking the scatter many, many, many times, which makes me wonder if I've got that inside a loop again somehow. So we're trying to generate a spruce tree. This is good. My coordinates are wrong. My Q value is not a number. So this is going to be an issue in either the entity client. Oh, I don't set that. I don't send that through. I'm a little bit confused here. Obviously, this is wrong, so this needs to be, for anyone new, these are just my my grid coordinates specified as UV, Q, and R. Check out episode 13 of my devlog for information about why. I'm going to put a breakpoint in there, debug the terrain service, which is the one calling into this client. I'm a bit confused as to why it chose the qr.q to skip out. I've got a feeling this here is not a number. So when I hit that breakpoint, the coordinate, the location, it has a valid chunk. It does not have a valid coordinate. Okay, I'm narrowing down on this. It doesn't like this hex.u and hex.v because that should be hex.q and hex.r. U and v refer to the chunk coordinates. Q and r refer to the hex coordinates, the axial coordinates. So I reckon this is going to be looking a lot better. Enough so that I'm not even going to put it in the debugger. I do still have the question of why it is checking whether or not the chunk has had its scatter generated too many times. But let's go and get our list of entities, and we have a whole lot of spruce trees. That's excellent. So I need to be able to delete those easily. Just by way of testing, I want to be able to have a troll in my world, and I want to be able to easily delete all of those spruce trees. Now, I do have an endpoint for if I can find it, sorry, for clearing out the scatter generated flag. So if we come down into the terrain, so yeah, down in here, we are able to ask it to remove the scatter. And at the moment, that clears the flag within Mongo. But we also want to be able to delete all of the matching, well, all of the scatter generated components. So we do have on the entity client, there is this query function, and this lets us query by location and by component. So the easiest thing for me to do here is to actually place a component on everything that is generated as scatter so that we can quickly identify them. So let's do that. I'm going to do a const, no, let's just do, yeah, we'll query them, then we'll delete them. I think this is the best way to do it. Existing scatter entities is going to be equal to query. We give it a query parameter. We can give it a region. This isn't ideal in my mind. I'd rather not specify a centroid and a radius. It feels kind of error prone to me, but I mean, it will do for now. I'd rather specify a chunk at this point, but I can't be bothered changing the entity service code to support that. So I will just pass it a centroid, which is going to be the this dot chunk coordinate. Now, what type is centroid? It has a chunk, it has a hex. So let's go centroid has a chunk, which is the chunk coordinate, and it has a hex, which is obviously going to be 0, 0, colon 0. Then I need to give it also a radius. Now the radius is just going to be the radius of the chunk. So this will have the same effect of finding all entities within a given chunk. It's just a bit verbose, and I would say a bit error prone. So that would find all of the entities in that chunk, but I want to go further, and I want to say anything having a component of type, I think I can say hash scatter. So I'll just put a scatter component on anything that has come up, on anything that I produce as part of the scatter system. And then existing scatter entities dot each, no, I want to map it. Promise dot all existing scatter entities dot map, entity goes to, and then I'll just delete it. So again, I've got consistency issues in here, but I will sort those out later. Promise.all, we need to do an entity client.delete by ID, entity.id. This needs an await so that it's no longer a promise. This needs an await so that we can actually wait for all of that stuff to get processed. And fix that. Okay. So this will, when we request that it clear the scatter, it will go through and ask for anything with this component on it that is in our within our chunk. It'll go through and request that each one be deleted. Well, it'll do this in parallel. So probably absolutely hammer my entity service for now. And then it will go through and clear the flag on the chunk saying that the scatter's been generated. This won't work yet, of course, because when I generate the scatter, I need to tell it to generate with a scatter component. So we'll give it params, and I'll give it some components. I think I can specify components. I don't think I've tested that code. What does a component look like? I can't remember. Oh, and is static is false as well. That I need to update as well. Components just have a type and then optionally attributes. I don't need any attributes for scatter yet. The type is going to be hash scatter. And as a reminder, the hash symbol here I use to indicate that this is an internal component, that there's no reason to share it with the client. So we're going to do that. What else did I say? I needed to also set the is static field to be true. All right. So before I can try this out, I need to manually delete all of my entities because none of these have the correct components on them. I need to, oh, that deleted the scatter flag. I also need to delete the entities. There we go. So requerying the entities, we have no entities. If I now query the chunk, it should have gone and generated a bunch of entities. Indeed, it did. My static is currently false. That's not a good sign. And my components don't have any of the desired components on them. So I'd say that I've just not implemented something on the server side. Entities controller. When we instantiate a prefab, we pull out these details. And sure enough, we pass the rotation from the details. I don't pass anything else. So what I'll do is I'll actually decompose the details. Const rotation. I don't think I can do that because I don't know if details is defined. That's a pain. But I think I can do a const rotation. Some languages let you define const without initializing it immediately. And it's something I really like because it means you can go and initialize it two different ways with an if statement. I'm pretty sure Node lets me do that. So if query is defined, details. If details is defined, then rotation is going to be equal to details. I also need, I'll be explicit here. I'll pull out the is static and I'll pull out components. Const rotation, const is static and const components. And then in here, I should be able to do an else. Rotation is going to be equal to this. Is static. Oh, it's not letting me do this. I'm going to have to change those to lets. That's all right. Is static is going to be false by default, and component is just going to be an empty list. These need to be lets. I thought that was valid syntax. Apparently I'm confused. All right. Is static is going to be equal to details dot is static. Components is going to be equal to that dot components. I still need to specify a default in here because this is a mess. Repeated code all over the place, but I'll factor all of that other stuff somewhere else. Some other time to do refactor this. That's nasty code. I'm sure I could just write a function that either returns the default or instantiates it from the details. Okay, so entity.location is that, entity.transform is that, entity.isStatic is going to be isStatic, and entity.components is going to be equal to components. All right. Is that going to work? Stop it. Most likely I'm going to need to debug the entity service. So I will spin that up in the debugger. I will delete all the entities. I will clear the scatter flag. Then I'll generate a chunk. I don't want to actually debug that yet. Oh, all these log messages checking if the field is set is definitely not right. And then we're getting a bunch of timeouts. Wow, okay, this is unhappy. Something has crashed. Okay. There is something wrong with the terrain service. So let's debug that. The first thing I notice is that this scatter generator is logging. Where's the log message? It's logging this way too often. Now, it does only appear to get called in the generate scatter. Generate scatter. Oh, okay. Ooh. Yes. I do have an issue here. No wonder this crashed. When we get a chunk, it's attempting to generate the scatter. But as part of generating scatter, it gets the chunk. All right. That's not ideal. So that will just be sitting there. I don't even understand how that worked before. So this obviously needs to come out into a separate phase. And yes. Where am I going to put this? Let's see where this get chunk gets called. All right, this is hacky, but I am going to put it just up in the router for now. It still doesn't. Yeah, I think this is the right place for me to put it just for now. That should be covered. But I need to factor this out into move this back into the controller. I just want to get this stuff working for now. Missing weight. Sorry, I'm just checking that everything is healthy with my stream. Yep. All right. That is running. I hit this up. That looked a little bit better. If I now grab my list of entities, we've got a bunch of entities. They have scatter components on them. They are static. It's pretty cool. Now, if I don't delete the entities, but instead clear the scatter flag, and then I fetch the entities, they're all gone. So to demonstrate why I just did that, let's go and generate the entities. We can see all the scatter is in there. I can go and put a troll in the game now. No, I can't. That is because I just changed all that code and didn't test it. Entities controller. It is going to be, here details is definitely defined. These are okay. All right, I've got to catch that error message. What is the error message? The error message is oh, it doesn't like the Y coordinate. So this is going to be the router. I have misunderstood something in here clearly. I thought that this would just remain undefined up in here. No, this is it. Rec dot. We're trying to pass undefined into that. If it's defined, then parse it. Otherwise, set it to -1. That needs to be a colon. That looks better. That just reload the server? No. While I'm in here, I'm going to quickly just change my package JSON on my entity service. Let's make sure that this is watching the correct files. It appears to be. Got all the TypeScript files. Everything inside common. Config YAML. I mean, it should also be doing /config.yaml. All right. Don't know what the story was there, why that service didn't restart. Okay, can I put the patrol in now? Still no. Oh, the process isn't running. Okay, so we should have a troll now. We grab our entities. This looks like a troll, does it? Components is empty. That's not a good sign. In fact, I notice as well that when we put the scatter component on, it looks like we overrode the item component. So this is another little bug in my entity controller. I am overloading the prefab. Grabbing the YAML, parsing it into an entity. Entity components should be ... entity components ... components. So it should be merging those two. And by putting this second, my understanding is this lets us override anything in the prefabs. Okay. Starting this all up, let's just clear the scatter flag. I'm going to explicitly remove all the entities. Check which entities we have. None. Good. Grab a chunk. Here it is. There's our chunk. Check our entities. Lots of entities. They correctly have 2 components on them now. I can now load a troll in. Check that he's there. There's our troll. Now, when I clear the scatter flag on the chunk, which I do with this command, and check the entities, we now just have a troll still in the game. Okay, that's starting to feel pretty good. Now, I'll probably finish up the stream pretty soon. I'll just do a quick recap of where I'm at. So I do have scatter generation. Chunk invalidation, what I'm hoping to do here is implement the actual code where the server will tell the client to go off and fetch all the entities for a given chunk. So I haven't done that yet. Port harvesting. Oh, I need to port harvesting across. That's a big task. Implement static entities. I've kind of implemented them, but again, I have some stuff I want to do with them over on the UDP transmitter. I want it to be just a bit, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what I want to do there. Chunk persistence is something I might work on this afternoon off stream. I just want to get the height maps and the hello Aaron M guy. I'm actually just about to finish up the stream. But yeah, no worries, you popping in and out. Yes, the height maps that I get back from this get endpoint. Where is it? So in here, all of this height map and what material things are made out of, that I need to cache. I also want to cache the meshes. So this is the mesh that gets used by the client to render each chunk, and it also gets used by the pathfinder. My next stream will be tomorrow. What's today? Today is Thursday my time. So yeah, tomorrow morning I'm going to aim to do the same time, so an earlier start again. So yes, I do intend to stream tomorrow. So what's it been? It's been a 3-hour stream. So hopefully in 21 hours again. So I'll get it to cache these. I may get it to cache some of the graph details, but that's probably the graph details for the nav mesh details. I might get it to cache those. That's a slightly bigger job though. I might even do that on stream. I think there's some interesting stuff in caching the nav meshes that is worth doing on stream. So hopefully before next stream, I will have all of this mesh and height map data all being cached in, well, not really cached, being persisted in Mongo, so that a bunch of code like the A* code should behave a lot better once it doesn't have to regenerate chunks for every single search. So thank you everyone for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I will be getting another devlog episode out this weekend, which will be summarizing the last couple of weeks' work on A*. And until I hopefully see you all tomorrow. Catch you around.